Eating the shrank. Egad. The meat is chewy and slimy and tastes like catfish meat. He describes how legs and sometimes whole corpses of shrank are roasted over a spit. I love this book for this fact alone. The rest that I'll mention here simply adds to the mountain-sized positive that is this quasi-cannibalism. I just admire Baker's balls with taking the story to this level. The best part is how much sense it makes. Baker doesn't just shoehorn this in. No, the Great Ordeal needs to subsist on something, and all Baker had to do was zero in on the practical limitations that are inherent to real-life military campaigns. Limitations that fantasy authors typically brush over. Alexander the Great planned his military routes based on where he could acquire food, all so he did not have to expend the effort of taking food stores with him. These realities matter. Baker builds upon this then by showing that there are consequences to eating the meat, despite the practical necessity of doing so. By consuming the flesh, they are slowly becoming more like the shrank in terms of behavior. They become more rash, more sexual, more violent, and depraved all around. This is where things really start to get fucked. The climax at Dagliash is a high point of the novel. We get to see the Great Ordeal spiral into depravity and insanity, some literally stripping naked and hurling themselves into the shrank hordes, arched penis and all. Others, like Seebewohl, become an unexpected asset as they bore into the hordes, causing it to part like the Red Sea. Schoolmen occupy the high points in the mountains, exterminating the shrank en masse as the horde is pinned up against the sea, the mountains, and the river. And the whole endeavor ends in catastrophe as Kellis manages to find a Techni artifact, something brought by the Inkoroi, and he sets off the nuke-like contraption, annihilating Shrank and a portion of his own army in the process, including Sabin. The section of the book ends with Kellis revealing to Proyas that he is abandoning the Great Ordeal, suggesting that it is now up to his last remaining Exalt General to lead the ordeal in his absence. How long this will extend or for what purpose is still unclear, and I personally have no idea what might be in store. All we know is that Proyas has been molded for this moment over the course of this novel. One final thing I have to comment on is the brief account of the Inkorei's ark falling from the void that takes place in this section. Baker shares accounts suggesting that the arrival of the Inkoroi violated our understanding of causality, that the ark's impact preceded the ark itself, with the latter falling no faster than an apple into its proper place after the fact. No explanation is given, and none of the implications are explored, but the implications are profound and terrifying all the same. First, it suggests that causality might be an illusion, or that certain things can violate causation. Interestingly enough, this might actually be the way in which free will might be possible in this universe. Maybe not. Baker does suggest that the Dunyain, while wrong, are not completely off the mark. Kellis's power of manipulation is undeniable, but this does make me wonder. Second, it implies that the Inkoroi are outside of human comprehension in ways that shatter our assumptions about the nature of the universe, and especially how Kellis and his Dunyain friends see the world. How will this play into the Unholy Consult? The No God series? We will see. This leads rather neatly into the next section, where I will talk about Proyas, Sabin, and Kellis. Proyas' loss of faith is completed in this volume. The Exalt General has been having personal meetings with Kellis, where his Lord and Savior has slowly been chipping away at his convictions. Up to this novel, we saw things purely from the point of view of Proyas, showing how he simply doesn't digest that Kellis is Dunyain, even when Kellis tells him so. Here, Kellis presses harder, breaking down Proyas' understanding of certainty, and then attacking his faith, even disgracing the god, even referring to him as it. He then sexually assaults Proyas, and the question of the meat's taint is on our minds. But there is still a macabre point to it all. The disgraceful act breaks Proyas and even horrifies Sabin, someone whose culture rejects homosexuality. The philosophical topics touched upon are admittedly more generic, at least to my perspective. I'm sure there are others who disagree, but these scenes are still an excellent showing of how to break down someone's worldview from its foundations. I've been involved in philosophy for long enough to see the staggering comparisons Kellis's interrogation has to people of all persuasions, and also in myself. It is so easy to overlook the complications in one's own beliefs. There are different parts to your belief system, and something that I've noticed in myself, and everyone for that matter, is that you focus in on the parts of your belief system that are the strongest, and ignore the weakest parts. Until someone challenges those weak parts and makes you flounder accordingly. The reason this works so well, though, is because of who Kells is to Proyas. Kells has used Proyas for years, and is only now breaking the truth to him, and it's all to use him in yet another way. Proyas now has to come to terms with the fact that all the killing he has done over the years has been done in the name of a lie, that he might just be a murderer rather than a man fighting for some absolute moral good. Achamian was the real prophet, the guy who chews his fingernails. Much of what happens with Proyas is set up for what is to come, and as I mentioned in the previous section, Proyas' time is only just beginning by the time his storyline comes to a close for the book itself. So we will have to wait until the Unholy Consult to see where this is all going. Sabin is an interesting contrast with Proyas. Sociologically, he is in the same position as Proyas, occupying the same military status, and also going through the same talks that Proyas has been going through. And seeing Sabin's lack of care at the revelation, that his truth was only ever the power that Kells could display, not the facade that he grafted over it, showed the perspective that I think I would have most likely occupied in that situation. I really do agree, basically, with his entire philosophy about how power is ultimately what matters, at least in this context, though I might dispute the specifics. But even Sabin finds himself broken by Kells, when he suddenly finds his faith, as twisted as his version might be, only to be callously discarded by Kells in the last moments of the Dagliash battle. This might also be part of the effect of eating the meat, as he starts to go rabid with sexual desire and the desire to kill, and also because his faith is so tied to his belief that expressions of power are the only real truth in life. Kells also receives his first perspective chapters in this book since the Prince of Nothing trilogy. Many of the scenes where Proyas is questioned are done through the perspective of Kells, and we get to see his meticulous deconstruction of people's characters that I love to see in the original trilogy. Additionally, there are cryptic features to this perspective that I do not understand, and for what I've seen, no one seems to understand, at least at this point in the reading of the series. There is a head on a pole behind you, and it cannot be moved. It was real heartwarming to see Kells up close again. Bakker, of course, is very careful not to reveal too much, read little to nothing to the reader while you occupy his head. Kells is still playing some game of interdimensional chess that we don't entirely understand, but I still appreciate the opportunity to see inside his head again. Sorwell's arc through the declining fortress of the non-men wins the award for the creepiest and most existentially disturbing thing that I have read in any story up until now. I have always found the idea of living forever and watching the ages go by to be incredibly appealing. Imagine being that guy who basically lived history thousands of years into the past. That would be awesome. Most people say they don't want to live forever because they don't want to lose all their loved ones, but I don't give a shit about that. That, at least, would not be my reasons to avoid it. If I did end up choosing to forgo eternal life, it would be for the reasons provided in this series. As far as we know, there is no limit to the human capacity for knowledge, but humanity hasn't exactly lived forever either. Bakker's portrayal as the non-men as slowly going insane from the weight of their memories, especially as they degrade away and slowly forget everything, is horrific. But why should Bakker stop there? Think about the world of Irwa as a whole. The non-men's life is a living hell, an abomination of experience that horrifies you in its own right. But it is within these chapters that Bakker reminds you that there is an afterlife of judgment, and that basically every non-man is damned. Whatever terror they're experiencing in this life will only increase in the next life. And what kind of existence is that? Bakker constructs a world that is an ethelist's wet dream. Where are all the antinatalists? And one wonders why a plague of wombs would be considered anything but a blessing in this world. Life is an imposition and a terror besides. I finished this book thinking that the judging eye had essentially confirmed the damnation of basically every character in the series. Is there a single one that isn't damned? I think I read somewhere either a fan review or Bakker's own summary of his series suggesting that Mymara is not damned, at least not yet. So we have that. And this is what makes this series so interesting. Antinatalists and ethelists get mocked in our world, and those ideas will always be fringed, that dear lord does Bakker make me think I would adopt both positions if I lived in this world. I have much more to say about the judging eye, but I want to save that for the section that takes place in Ishwal. So the last thing I want to cover in this section is the whole question of certainty. Kellis ripped Proyas and his convictions apart as their ordeal chased after the fish-skinned beasts they're feeding upon, and you would think this skepticism would be applied consistently. Which opens up one of the more interesting questions, which is how the characters know that the gods exist and that there even is an afterlife in the first place. Sorcery exists. There is some strange shit going on related to the gods, like the scene where Yatward gives Sorweel his kore. But something tells me there might be something more to this. The quote from Whitelock about how the gods appear to us as human, because otherwise we'd recoil from them as spiders come to mind. And because Bakker is so philosophical, it makes me wonder if he's going to massively reinterpret his metaphysics and completely shatter our understanding of how the world works. I always think of Thomas Kuhn and his notion of paradigm shifts. Is there going to be this Gestalt switch moment in the next book? Or maybe the next series? And will Bakker only make the world uglier? Is that even possible? Still, I think it is worth asking about this afterlife. There are good meta reasons to believe that there is an afterlife. After all, the entire plot of the series is based on this assumption. The Consult want to save their souls from damnation, and this drives literally everything that happens in the series. But perhaps we shouldn't put it past Bakker to end the series with the reveal or suggestion that this whole conflict is a pointless delusion, that the Consult were simply killing people without any actual effect, and there really is no afterlife to be liberated from after all. That would be darkly funny too, in a good way. I think I got a little lost in the philosophical side of things, not that this is a bad thing, so let me wrap up this part by talking about the actual scenes. Sorweel is led into the depths of Ishtarabinth by Oinarl, a non-man who opposes the fact that the non-man fortress has fallen to the influence of the Consult. They seek out the latter's father in the hopes that he can turn things around and stop the current non-man leader, whatever the fuck his name is. The descent leads them through the increasing levels of insanity that the non-men go through over time. There are outright horror sequences that actually remind me of the scene from McCarthy's The Road, where the father and his son go into the basement full of begging, pleading food, desperately grasping at them for reprieve. My god. Except it's worse. And it's in this context that we are reminded of what the afterlife has in store for them. They are unable to kill themselves because of their intrinsic nature, and no one dares kill them, given that this is just bliss in comparison. And my god. An interesting addition is the Amuleus, which is a helmet that connects Sorweel with the soul of another non-man. Partly it is a convenient plot device, not in a bad way, for Sorweel and the reader to receive important world-building information about the non-men. Bakker takes advantage of the thing to draw out the implications of joining two consciousnesses together. Sorweel not only remembers things that he ought to not know, but also feels things and reacts to things in a way that the non-man he is fused with would. There was a point in the journey that I thought Sorweel might be being taken advantage of and would be subsumed by the non-man in the helmet altogether, but luckily for him that did not happen. One gripe would be the execution of Sorweel's realization of the Amuleus. He almost immediately draws out the implications to layman's that he's not himself anymore. The idea of this is not the problem. We actually got interesting philosophical musings from Sorweel in The Judging Eye, when he learned a new language. I just thought that Bakker's execution of this was a little too sudden. Bakker could have pushed back his musings and fear to a later point, like when he recognizes a lover because of the shared consciousness. It has only just occurred to me, but this might have interesting connections to Chucky, who I will talk about later in the post. Both have a kind of dual consciousness that I expect Bakker to touch upon later in the story. I can't think of any detailed implications off the top of my head, but I will mention them below if I do come up with some. Finally, let me talk about the more specific discussion of the gods not being able to see the no-god. There is still no story explanation for why this is. In retrospect, this is false apparently. Though I have mentioned in the previous reviews that I spoiled the fact that the no-god is a philosophical zombie. I do wonder how Bakker is going to portray this, however. I keep thinking of how the Dunyain have stripped themselves of their identity, which I will cover below, and I think this might tie into the no-god somehow. If Kellis is the no-god, then will his Dunyain nature affect how the no-god operates? The post-eugenics domain did not exist in the last apocalypse, so the question is how things will change. I suggested immunity to the Heron Spear before, but we will see. Another brief thought regarding Kellis being the no-god, or perhaps someone else, is the idea that the no-god is a clone. If this is the case, this might explain how the no-god is a philosophical zombie. A clone is simply a physical copy of a person, and thus will not have a copy of the original person's soul. It also implies that Kellis will be there to see his soul-dead twin take action. I mentioned above very briefly that there is, in fact, an in-story explanation for the no-god being invisible to the gods. It's because the no-god causes the end of everything. Not only is it invisible, but the gods can't even conceptualize the no-god. I'm definitely going to have to reread this series to expand on this point, however.